Welcome to the Way of the Taibhsear podcast. This is episode 9, Global Warming. Global warming is a hot topic these days. Climate scientists around the world agree that the Earth is heating up. That fact is not in question. The question is whether mankind is contributing to this temperature increase. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, human activities have had a discernible influence on the global climate and global warming. It is a serious problem that must be addressed immediately. In fact, the vast majority of scientists agree that human activities have contributed greatly to global warming. There are a few dissenting scientists, but a survey of those who claim that human activities don't influence global warming are overwhelmingly scientists whose specialties are outside of the fields of climate science and meteorology. Asking such scientists their opinion on global warming is a bit like asking an auto mechanic to treat your heart condition. Most of the dissenting scientists have a political agenda rather than an environmental one. If you look at who funds most of these scientists who deny global warming, you won't have to dig too deeply to find that their funding has links to the fossil fuel industry. So how many scientists actually deny global warming or climate change? According to a 2013 study by Dr. John Cook called Quantifying the Consensus on Anthropogenic Global Warming in the Scientific Literature, 97% of scientists agree that global warming is real and caused in large part by human activities. This means that only 3% of scientists are unsure that global warming is a problem caused by humans. Note also that this 3% is not necessarily saying that global warming isn't caused by humans. The 3% who are dissenting are saying that they're just not convinced yet in spite of the overwhelming evidence. You may be aware that the Supreme Court heard a case in 2006 concerning the EPA and global warming. At stake was the question of whether or not federal government had a right to restrict carbon emissions. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that contributes to global warming. At the crux of this case is whether or not carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide may be classified as a pollutant and whether the EPA has a right to declare it so or not. The case was brought by 12 states against the Bush administration for apparent violations of the Clean Air Act. Bush's EPA decided that the carbon dioxide is not a pollutant and that human activities such as burning fossil fuels do not contribute significantly to global warming. There's something of a consensus on global warming, but not a consensus on how much is attributable to human activity. That was Justice Antonin Scalia at the hearing. The fact that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas is not in dispute. The planet Venus, for example, has an atmosphere composed mainly of carbon dioxide, and although it is only a few million miles closer to the Sun than our Earth, its surface temperature averages around 800 degrees Fahrenheit. This is due to the greenhouse effect caused by the carbon dioxide in its atmosphere. The fact that the Earth is heating up is also not in dispute. The only question, as Scalia said, is how much humans are contributing to the problem. We know that fossil fuels cause carbon dioxide emissions. We also know that humans use vehicles that emit carbon dioxide. We know that the power plants that burn fossil fuels also emit carbon dioxide. In short, a large part of the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is the result of human activities. In my opinion, sitting back and doing nothing about the carbon emissions while the planet continues to heat up is the moral equivalent of saying, oh well, the boat's sinking anyway, so what harm would it do if I just drilled a few more holes in the side? In spite of an overwhelming amount of evidence that human activities play a part in global warming, there are still quite a few people who think that global warming is some kind of vast conspiracy concocted by scientists. The goal of this conspiracy remains unclear. There is still enough opposition to taking action on global warming that it is a major concern for those of us who care about the environment. Many politicians don't want to take any action until they can be 100% certain that human activities contribute to global warming. Let's start our discussion on climate change with this idea of certainty about scientific data. Imagine you've gone to the doctor for your annual physical. She runs the usual tests, and when the results come back, she has some bad news for you. You have the symptoms of cancer. Suppose then you ask your doctor, can you be 100% certain that I have cancer? She tells you she can't be certain without further testing and possibly exploratory surgery. She wants to refer you to an oncologist. You tell her that unless she's 100% certain that you have cancer, you're not going to visit an oncologist, nor are you going to submit to further tests. Would you be wise in making such a statement? Some politicians don't want to take action on global warming because they say that scientists can't be 100% certain that human activities are contributing to the climate change. Yet with each new study we come closer and closer to the conclusion that human activities are playing a part. Would any reputable scientist come out and say with 100% certainty that global warming is caused by human actions? No. This doesn't mean, however, that there is not an overwhelming amount of scientific evidence to support the fact. This is just how science works. Science is never arrogant enough to assume that anything can be known with 100% accuracy. This does not mean, however, that a scientific probability is therefore false. Let's look at an example to illustrate the point. Suppose I show you a pistol. The pistol appears to be in good working order and properly loaded. This doesn't mean, however, that the pistol is 100% guaranteed to fire. The firing mechanism could jam. The cartridge could misfire. A meteor might strike me before I could pull the trigger. There's any number of things that could prevent the pistol from firing. Since you can't be 100% certain that the pistol will fire, does that therefore mean you would feel safe standing in front of me while I pointed at you and pulled the trigger? As more and more evidence of climate change comes in, it becomes more and more certain that human activities are playing a part. Global warming was first conceived of in 1886. Back then they only had slide rules with which to crunch the numbers. The supercomputers of today use climate modeling to make increasingly accurate predictions. One of the ways that we know these supercomputers work much better than the slide rules of a century ago is that the predictions made by climate scientists become increasingly accurate over time as the process is refined. In short, while it's impossible to ever know anything with 100% certainty, climate scientists of today are rapidly approaching the 99.9% certainty mark. And the news doesn't look good. How bad is it? In September of 2012, the Vancouver Observer released a story on the Arctic death spiral ice melt. Professor Peter Wadhams of Cambridge University calls it a global disaster. Climate scientists have known for quite a while that the Arctic ice melt would reach a tipping point that would lead to rapid acceleration of melting ice. This tipping point has occurred, and we are now seeing less ice than the planet has seen for millions of years. The International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, stated that the rapid acceleration of ice loss in the Arctic far exceeds even their worst-case scenarios. Why should we care about Arctic sea ice melting? As a member of the IPCC stated, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. There will be some very real and very significant effects of this rapid depletion of Arctic ice. A question or comment you hear often when people talk about global warming is, "My local weatherman can't even tell me what the weather will be like tomorrow. How can I believe scientists when they tell me that global warming is happening?" To start with, meteorology and climatology are entirely different sciences. Meteorology looks at the short-term events and tries to predict the outcome. Even though they can't nail it on the head all the time, they still have a pretty good average. Climatology, on the other hand, looks at long-range patterns. To illustrate the difference, suppose you have a nickel and I ask you to predict the outcome of a single coin toss. You have a 50-50 chance of correctly predicting the outcome. Now let's say I ask you to predict the outcome over 5 coin tosses. Let's say that you also go out on a limb and predict that all 5 coin tosses would be heads. If all 5 coin tosses came up heads, it would be unusual, but it would not be outside the realm of possibility. With each additional coin toss, however, the average would begin to approach the 50-50 mark. The more points of data you have, the more accurate your result will be. Meteorology is attempting to predict the outcome of a single coin toss. Climatology, on the other hand, has much more data at its disposal. Climate scientists now have the ice core data from over 650,000 years of core samples of atmospheric conditions, which make our predictions on the weather. The more data they have, the more accurate their predictions. This huge amount of data, upon which to make predictions over long spans of time, is much more accurate than trying to predict a single day's weather, simply because the amount of data used to make the predictions is so large. NASA scientist James Hansen states that the tilting point for global warming is about 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide. Beyond that point, climate change can be demonstrated beyond all reasonable doubt to be caused largely by human activities. Scientists from the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii reported that in January of 2015, carbon dioxide had reached 400 parts per million for the first time in recorded history. Ice core data on trapped atmospheric carbon dioxide shows that throughout most of the 650,000-year history of the ice core data studied, carbon dioxide levels range from 100 parts per million to 300 parts per million. But at roughly the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere began to slowly increase to the present range. It is an established fact that carbon dioxide contributes to the greenhouse effect. So it is only natural to assume that more carbon dioxide equals higher temperatures. And we've passed the mark now where carbon dioxide in the atmosphere could be caused by anything other than human activities. While it's a scientific axiom that correlation does not prove causality, global temperatures have been rising in parallel with the amount of carbon dioxide in the air, and those who claim that correlation does not prove causality are stuck with providing an alternative proposal. If carbon dioxide isn't responsible for the increase in global average temperature, what is? And don't forget, you can scientifically demonstrate in a laboratory that carbon dioxide contributes to greenhouse gases and to global warming. Those who wish to deny the prevailing scientific opinion have attempted to come up with alternative solutions to the questions of climate change. 2 alternate explanations for global warming seem to be gaining popularity. But how realistic are these explanations? The first alternative explanation offered by global warming deniers is that water vapor is a greenhouse gas, and that increases in water vapor across the globe are responsible for global warming. The second explanation is that sunspots are causing it. In other words, hot spots on the surface of the sun produce more heat, and as this heat travels to Earth, it causes increases in global temperature. Note also that neither of these theories explains why the increase in carbon dioxide emissions in our atmosphere is positively correlated with the increase in global temperature. In other words, both the sunspot theory and the water vapor theory ignore carbon dioxide altogether, even though it is a demonstrable fact that carbon dioxide in our atmosphere has been steadily increasing in proportion to the global average temperature. No proponent of the water vapor theory has yet been able to explain why the amount of water vapor in the air doesn't correlate with the global average temperature. The water vapor myth also has not been able to explain what supposedly started this increase in water vapor in the first place. Nor has the myth been able to explain the correlation between increased carbon dioxide and increased global temperatures. The water vapor theory says nothing at all about carbon dioxide. So is it true that water vapor is a greenhouse gas? If it is, what does this have to do with the global climate change? While water vapor could contribute to the greenhouse effect, it simply does not persist in the atmosphere long enough to do that much damage. Water vapor remains in the atmosphere for just a few days, while carbon dioxide lingers for hundreds of years. Not only that, but the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere creates a synergistic effect. That is, the more it accumulates, the more damage it does. In addition to the fact that water vapor only stays in the atmosphere for a few days, remember rain? In order for water vapor to have a significant factor in climate change, scientists would first have to demonstrate that humans have caused a significant increase in the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. There's no evidence that this is true. If water vapor were indeed responsible for global warming, there would be an observable, slow buildup of water vapor in the atmosphere. No such buildup is occurring with water vapor, but it is occurring with carbon dioxide. This buildup of carbon dioxide is an observed, measurable fact. Not so with water vapor. If you've had a basic secondary school science education, you know that water vapor is highly dependent on temperature. Any excess water vapor in the atmosphere is rapidly lost in the form of rain, snow, fog, or other types of precipitation. There is no buildup of water vapor over time. On the other hand, carbon dioxide continues to accumulate in the atmosphere. Even if all carbon dioxide emissions stopped all over the world today, it would still take hundreds of years for the atmosphere to return to pre-industrial levels of carbon dioxide. To think of it in another way, there's no limit to the amount of rain that can fall, but there is a limit to the amount of carbon dioxide that the Earth's plants, animals, and oceans can absorb. The surplus carbon dioxide that doesn't get absorbed goes into the atmosphere to accumulate. There are other greenhouse gases, such as methane from cow burps and other sources, but the amount of these gases that are currently in the atmosphere pales in significance to the amount of carbon dioxide. When analyzing for relative effects of all the current greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, scientists have determined that carbon dioxide caused by human activities is responsible for over 2/3 of the observed climate change. So the short answer is that water vapor could be considered a greenhouse gas, but when compared to carbon dioxide, water vapor's capacity for warming is the equivalent of a lit match to a carbon dioxide's atomic bomb. On the sunspot theory, solar astronomer Peter Foucault says, "There's been an intuitive perception that the sun's variable degree of brightness, the coming and going of sunspots, for instance, might have an impact on climate." Foucault says that most climate change models, including the ones used by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, already incorporate the effects of the sun's waxing and waning power on the Earth's weather. According to a study by Foucault in Nature magazine in September of 2006, the difference in temperature caused by sunspot activity is simply far too small to contribute significantly to global warming. Foucault and his team of researchers gathered sunspot activity data from as far back as 1874 and attempted to correlate these records with the temperature records gleaned from ice core samples. They found that the data simply did not match up. The bottom line is that there is only a 0.1% temperature variance in sunspot activity. According to Foucault, this variance is far too small to have any major impact on the overall global average temperature of the Earth. It also doesn't explain the correlation between increased carbon dioxide in our atmosphere and increased global average temperature. In short, sunspot theory is not a credible or plausible explanation for global warming. Quite often you'll hear from global warming dissenters that many leading scientists object to global warming theory. This argument is often used to demonstrate that there is no major scientific consensus that human activities are contributing in any significant way to global warming. While it is true that some have dissented, in order to gain a sense of perspective on what the scientific consensus really is, we must first define what we mean by many and scientists. For example, a 2005 U.S. Senate report had about 400 scientists stating that they did not believe that human activities played a significant part in global warming. A Canadian group of 60 scientists also signed a letter to that effect in 2006. However, on closer examination of the credentials of these scientists, many of them were retired, and the majority of them had areas of expertise unrelated to climatology. Added together, the U.S. and Canadian dissenters who made statements number about 500. In contrast, about 11,000 scientists who are actively engaged in climate research around the world signed a petition protesting U.S. President George Bush's stance on global warming when he was in office. When you do the math, this means that only 1 in 22 scientists object to the consensus that climate change is caused largely by human activities. And of this 1 in 22, the majority of those had specialties in fields other than climate science. Rendering an opinion by writing a letter to a Senate committee is quite a bit different also than publishing an actual research paper in a peer-reviewed journal. The process of peer review means that the article meets rigorous requirements for scientific accuracy. Such papers are examined thoroughly by a panel of experts in the field to ensure that what is being published has been investigated and fact-checked. So what do these peer-reviewed journals have to say about the subject? In 2004, a study by Naomi Oreskes looked at over 1,000 peer-reviewed scientific journal articles that reference global warming in some way. The papers examined were all published in the last decade, and all were subject to a rigorous review by experts in climatology. Her study found that not a single one of these papers denied that global warming was happening. Furthermore, not a single one of these 1,000 papers denied that human activities were responsible in a large part for climate change. In 2013, the study we mentioned earlier by John Cook yielded similar results by examining peer-reviewed papers on global warming and climate change. It's important to note that only 3% of those peer-reviewed scientific papers failed to state that human activities are responsible for some part of climate change. It's also important to remember that those 3% that did not say that humans were responsible for some part of climate change also did not deny that humans were responsible. They simply took no position on the issue. Given the amount of hostility towards the scientific investigation of climate change in the current U.S. Congress, it's understandable why some scientists might not want to go on the record as saying that humans are responsible. On the other hand, 97% of those peer-reviewed papers did say that humans are responsible in some way. In addition to this unanimous consensus in the scientific literature, the American Meteorological Society, the American Geophysical Union, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and various scientific organizations of Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Italy, Japan, Russia, the United Kingdom, have all issued statements in recent years that the evidence for human modification of climate is more than convincing. In fact, the evidence is so compelling, global warming has produced a consensus that is rarely seen in the skeptical world of science. Scientists are trained to be skeptical by nature, so if skeptics worldwide overwhelmingly agree, it's safe to conclude that there may be a reason. That reason is that scientists have concluded that humans are responsible for some part of global warming. One of the most useful aspects of science is that data can be used to make predictions. By collecting data and studying how systems interact, it is possible to extrapolate further using data, and to thereby make predictions as to the outcome of future events. One of the tests of the accuracy of a theory is the accuracy of the predictions that it makes. Climate science uses mathematical modeling based on climate models. In the early days, numbers had to be crunched by hand using slide rules and pencils. Nowadays, we have supercomputers capable of making millions or billions of calculations per second. The more calculations that can be made, the more accurate the model will be. Scientists working in the field of climatology have been making predictions about global warming since as early as 1896. Back then, as we already said, the calculations were slow because computers didn't exist. Even so, they were still able to make certain predictions about carbon dioxide and its relationship to global temperature. Svante Arrhenius was a Swedish scientist who predicted in 1896 that carbon dioxide emissions due to human activities would raise global temperatures. Even though he was working with very primitive equipment by today's standards, he still attained some degree of success with his predictions. Since Arrhenius' time, science has progressed quite a bit. Climatologists have made a number of predictions based on climate data. The proof of the pudding lies in the accuracy of the predictions those models have made. Some of the early predictions made by climate models include NASA scientist James Hansen in 1988 predicted that temperatures would climb over the next 12 years. His predictions were remarkably accurate. Models have predicted that increase in surface temperatures would be accompanied by a cooling of the stratosphere. This prediction has been confirmed by satellite data. Models have predicted that a brief cooling period would occur in the event of a large volcanic eruption due to volcanic dust and ash in the atmosphere blocking the sunlight. The eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1994 confirmed this prediction. Models predicted that global warming effects would be accelerated in the Arctic regions as snow melted. Snow reflects sunlight, but the Earth underneath the snow absorbs sunlight. This prediction has been confirmed by observation and by temperature measurement. Finally, models predict an accelerating increase in surface temperature, correlating to the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This has been amply demonstrated to be so. In almost every instance, computer models of climate change have made accurate predictions. Another way to test the validity of computer models is a technique called hindsighting. In hindsighting, computer models are started from a known period in history, using atmospheric data available for that time period. They are then run forward to a later time. The results are compared to the climate data for that later time for accuracy. For example, using data from the 1880s, the computer model is set to run from 1880 to the present. The computer results are then compared to the actual observed data from the present time. The results reveal that the climate model is accurate because the data from the computer model matches what is actually observed in real life. A true test of scientific theory is its power to make predictions about future events. Climate models for global warming have demonstrated such predictability. Dissenters are stuck with the problem of coming up with an alternative theory that explains the data. To date, no such alternative theory exists. Global warming dissenters sometimes claim that climate change scientists are part of some vast global conspiracy. Apparently, the goal of such demagoguery is to promote the idea that global warming conspirators somehow silence dissenting voices by not allowing them equal time in the media or in the scientific literature. Well, for several years I wrote an internationally syndicated column on environmental issues called The Culture Artist. In 2007, I wrote a series on global warming and climate change. When I began this series, several editors informed me that they would not be carrying the series on climate change. Others inform me that they would no longer carry the column at all. If there's any silencing to be done by the media, global warming dissenters aren't the only ones being silenced. I think that a large part of the fear behind the dissent comes from the fact that accepting carbon emission standards would mean making financial sacrifices. While this may be true to some extent, with careful planning, a large part of this financial burden can be alleviated. Just to give you an example, according to some estimates, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan cost American taxpayers about $275 million per day, for a total of about $500 billion. This works out to nearly $4,100 for every household in the United States. If the U.S. had invested that money instead into alternative energy programs, then the U.S.'s dependence on crude oil from foreign countries would probably be a thing of the past by now. We already have the technology to do away with fossil fuels altogether. Granted, being able to make the switch involves building a new infrastructure to support new energy alternatives. But building such an infrastructure would create much-needed jobs worldwide as new technologies become more readily available on the market. Carbon emissions reductions have added benefits as well. Cleaner energy means a cleaner environment, not just in terms of greenhouse gases, but also in terms of acid rain from coal-burning plants, vehicle emissions, and waste products from refineries and the industry. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. It ended because we found better ways to make tools. It could be that we are learning better ways to power our homes and our vehicles as well. The theory on peak oil says and recognizes the scientific fact that oil is a limited resource. Eventually we will run out of oil altogether because no more is being made. The only way to make more oil is to bury tons and tons of plant material in the ground and wait for a few million years. So if peak oil hits and we have no more oil, you can be assured that people will be scrambling for alternatives at that point in time. But ultimately, if the majority consensus on climate is wrong, but we take action anyway, we will have gained energy independence and a cleaner, more sustainable lifestyle. But if the climate scientists are right, and we take no action, our children will reap the consequences. On January 30th, 2007, the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform held a hearing on government interference in the research conducted by climate scientists working for federal agencies. The panelists included Dr. Francesca Griffo, Director of the Scientific Integrity Program, and Rick Plitz, formerly of the U.S. Climate Change Science Program. Plitz resigned that post in 2005, citing government censorship of climate change scientists as his reason for doing so. In 2013, Governor Rick Scott of Florida effectively banned any Florida government official from using the words global warming or climate change. Since that time, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Louisiana, and Tennessee have all passed legislation limiting or banning the use of the words global warming and climate change by government employees. Setting aside the fact that these laws violate the First Amendment right to free speech by people who claim to love the Constitution, it should be clear that if there is any conspiracy going on regarding global warming, it's a conspiracy by those who wish to deny the reality of climate change, and not the other way around. I've always been of the opinion that if your side has the truth, then there's no need to silence the opposition. The truth will be self-evident. On the other hand, if you're working so hard to silence any opposing views, it's pretty obvious that you know deep down that your side doesn't have the truth. As we said, the truth is self-evident and shouldn't need to be protected by trying to muzzle any opposing views. Scientists continually cite references to peer-reviewed studies to underscore the fact but there is an overwhelming consensus among scientists that human activities are significantly contributing to global warming. In spite of this, there are many non-scientists, largely politicians with interests in the fossil fuel industry, who insist that global warming is a solely natural phenomenon and that human activities play no significant part in planetary climate change. On the other hand, you don't have to be a scientist to know that something is amiss when daffodils are blooming in December and the ice caps are melting. So the question is whether we humans are contributing to global warming and not whether it's actually occurring. Let's ignore the majority scientific opinion and assume for a moment that humans play no part in climate change. Granted this assumption, would the proposed actions to curtail greenhouse gases serve any benefit whatsoever? That is to say, even if global climate change weren't really happening, would the proposed solutions being offered to fight climate change help or hurt the economy and the world? Since the majority of planned action on global warming involves curtailing the use of fossil fuels, consider the following. Even if humans played no part in global warming, would lessening or even eliminating our dependence on foreign oil by developing biofuels and other fuel alternatives be a good thing or a bad thing? Even if humans played no part in global warming, would producing more hybrid cars and electric cars that run on clean energy be a good thing or a bad thing? Even if humans played no part in global warming, would reducing or even eliminating coal-burning power plants by replacing them with alternative energy sources that don't pollute the atmosphere be a good thing or a bad thing? Even if humans played no part in global warming, would building homes with green technology so that they use less energy and resources be a good thing or a bad thing? Even if humans played no part in global warming, would eliminating runaway deforestation be a good thing or a bad thing? There are two possible answers to whether humans are contributing to global warming. Either we are or we aren't. If we aren't, but we still take actions to reduce carbon emissions and greenhouse gases, there are still significant benefits to be gained by creating a cleaner environment and minimizing or eliminating dependence on foreign oil. But if the majority scientific consensus is correct, and we are contributing to global warming, yet we take no action on it, do the benefits of taking no action outweigh the risks? Let's look at some of the risks that we'd be taking if we don't do anything to prevent further global warming. Some of the effects include increased worldwide droughts in some areas, creating dust bowls and leading to famines. Increased risk of disease as worldwide wildlife sanctuaries are affected by drought, causing increasing animal and insect migrations. Loss of water tables in major urban areas, causing failure of water supply systems to large populations, as is already happening in California. Global changes in weather patterns, including increased intensity and severity of storms, as has already happened with Katrina and Sandy. Increased deaths due to heat waves. Loss of Arctic and Antarctic animals and habitats. Increased instances of asthma and bronchial disorders worldwide. Increased volcanic activity due to loss of glaciers and other climate-related environmental factors. Increase in earthquakes due to the unloading of the ice caps. Increased acidification of the oceans, leading to increasingly rapid loss of many forms of sea life, including food fish species that feed half the human population. Increased wildfires as droughts continue, as has already happened in much of the Southwest. Increased record flooding in other areas as the global weather patterns change, as we've already witnessed in the Midwest. Change in global social and political systems induced by famine, declining resources, and increasingly uninhabitable regions affected by global temperature. Global increase in death due to the cumulative effects of worldwide food shortages, increased disease, and deaths due to heat, earthquakes, floods, storms, and volcanic activities. These are just a few of the more severe effects we can look forward to in the coming decades. Since many scientists feel that we have already reached the tipping point, in other words, the time has passed for us to be able to make any serious change, it is more likely than not that we will see many of these changes in our lifetimes. In fact, we've already begun to witness many of them. Although it's probably already too late to stop many of these problems from occurring, it's better to try to make what changes we can rather than continue to run towards the cliff. In short, what if global warming isn't real, and we build a cleaner, less polluted, and more sustainable world for nothing?
She's hot and getting high, and a mood is set to swing. We all run for cover, 'cause any little thing will get her hot and bothered and make her bear her claws. Mama guy is changing, yeah. Mama's rearranging. Mama guy is going through menopause. You can call it global warming, blame it on the man, cutting down the forests and paving what we can. I'm telling you, get ready, no matter what the cost, 'cause Mama guy is sweating, there ain't no forgetting. Mama guy is going through menopause. I'm going through the change myself, it's my advice to you. You will do what Mama says if you want to live. I have me some night sweats, and I will tell you true, there ain't enough St. John's wort on this whole wide planet, baby, for what she's going through. She's rocking out them solar flares, she's breaking up the storm, she's melting down a bit each day, and hey, it's getting warm, get ready for the summer that never seems to pause. I say we take our clothes off and violate some laws, 'cause Mama guy is heating up, the temperature is creeping up, and Mama guy is going through menopause. Oh, Mama guy is changing, Mama's rearranging. Mama guy is going through menopause.
We must protect the forests for our children, grandchildren, and children yet to be born. We must protect the forests for those who can't speak for themselves, such as the birds, animals, fish, and trees. Quatsinus, the hereditary chief Edward Moody of the Nuksalk Nation. How realistic is a totally sustainable lifestyle? Well, how realistic is it to expect to continue living the same lifestyle we've always lived after we've exhausted all the resources on the planet? The concept of sustainable living is fairly simple. It means basing our lives on resources that can be replaced or recycled. Anybody in a few short weeks or months can learn to apply many of these techniques in their own lifestyles. Doing so leads to a more environmentally friendly existence for anyone who takes the path. Sustainable living is great as a principle for protecting the environment and providing for the future. But I like to think that there is much more to it than just taking care of our basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter. While we are learning to care for and cherish the animal life around us, maybe we could take time to care for and cherish the human life around us as well. What if there's a sustainable lifestyle of the soul? What would that look like? I believe that if there is any way for such a thing to be possible, And if there is such a thing as the human spirit, it's a renewable resource just as valuable as any other. Everyone needs some time and a special quiet place to replenish this resource. Another aspect of spiritual sustainability, to me, lies in how we treat each other. I know I'm far from perfect, so I try to spend what energy I have working on my own faults rather than on the perceived faults of others. I far too often fall short of the mark in this regard, but lately when I catch myself spending energy on negativity and fault-finding, I try to reel myself in and ask, can I afford to waste spiritual energy that I have in limited supply on finding fault in others when I could better spend this energy working on my own imperfections? To carry this line of reasoning forward to the society at large, I believe that a truly sustainable society would respect the inherent worth and dignity of all of its members. This respect for the rights of all living things is the second sacred pillar of the order of the Taibhsear. We all have a favorite person or group we love to oppose, whether that opposition is based on race, religion, politics, favorite sports team, musical taste, favorite ice cream, or any other label we choose to hang on what those other people believe in. The point is that I don't think anyone on the planet thinks that their beliefs are wrong, or they wouldn't hold them so dearly. We don't have to embrace every belief that comes along, but if we are to have a truly spiritually sustainable lifestyle, I think we need to respect the rights of those who hold those beliefs, no matter how distasteful those beliefs might be to ourselves. Of course, your freedom to swing your arms also ends at my nose. Radical extremist beliefs that lead to violence, chaos, abuse, and death should never be tolerated by anyone. When confronted with such actions, however, we need to at least try to understand what motivated the person or the people behind them to take such drastic action. I think that there's a way to reach almost anyone if you reach them in time before the demons of hatred and fear totally overwhelm their capacity for reason. Far too often, clashes of beliefs lead to misunderstandings, arguments, fights, and even wars. To prevent such events, all we need to do is to keep talking to each other and trying to understand each other. We should always remember that nobody ever stopped a war by taking part in one. We should focus on what we have in common rather than what we have that is different from each other. A little tolerance goes a long way. By respecting the person behind the belief, we will come a lot closer to a peaceful, more sustainable world. We're all in this together, for better or worse. If we work together and lay aside our differences for the better, things won't get worse. If we don't, then things will never get better. the Taibhsear, we use the Celtic tree alphabet known as the Ogham. In this section of the podcast, we will present one character of the Ogham each week, offering information on the meaning of each letter of the Ogham alphabet, trees associated with each letter, the healing and magical properties of each tree, gods and goddesses associated with each tree and letter, and the divinatory meanings of each letter of the Ogham. Since we will be discussing medicinal uses of the plants in this segment of the podcast, please remember that herbal medicine requires caution and practice. None of the medicinal uses discussed on the Way of the Taibhsear podcast should be attempted by a novice. Some parts of the plants of the Ogham are poisonous, and people with allergies should also be aware of the potential allergic reactions to plants. If you are interested in herbal medicine, find a skilled practitioner and take lessons. Do not attempt to use medicinal plants without the supervision of an expert. The letter H in the Ogham alphabet is represented by Hua. It is associated with the tree hawthorn. The divinatory meaning of Hua is results, consequences, and repercussions. Healing properties. The berries of the hawthorn have been used to treat irregular heartbeat, high blood pressure, hardening of the arteries, and chest pain. Infusions of hawthorn leaves and berries may be used as a tonic to help with heart problems, angina, and poor circulation. The berries contain vitamins C and B complex. Juice from the berries of the hawthorn have been known to help with kidney stones, bladder problems, and indigestion. Druids use hawthorn tea as a tonic to provide vigor to the elders. This tea is made by steeping dried hawthorn berries in boiling water for about 20 minutes. The resulting infusion can be sweetened with honey for an added boost. The leaves and blossoms of the hawthorn may be made into a tea to relieve anxiety. This tea also helps to improve the circulation and to increase appetite. Magical uses of the hawthorn. Hawthorn is known as the Queen of May, or the fairy tree. The hawthorn blooms in May, and its blossoming signifies the beginning of the Beltane, or the Belchenia season. The hawthorn is one of the trees of the sacred Druid triad of oak, ash, and thorn, thorn being the hawthorn. In this triad, the oak represents sovereignty, the ash represents the sacred world tree that is the web of life, and the hawthorn represents the divine and magical power of the Fae. Hawthorn is one of the 9 firewoods to be added to the Belfire for the Festival of Beltane on May 1st. The 9 sacred woods of the Belfire are birch, oak, rowan, willow, hawthorn, hazel, apple, grapevine, and fir. In ancient times, and even to this day, hawthorn is planted by those who can't afford to build fences to keep their herds in place. Its thick and dense branches created an effective barrier to keep the livestock in place. Because of this property, hawthorn is used in ritual for protection and containment. Hawthorn magic is the magic of protection, especially for the weak and the powerless. Hawthorn branches are used in ritual purification. Hawthorn is a tree sacred to the fairies. It is said that if you find a spot where oak, ash, and thorn are growing together, you will see fairies there. Hawthorn blooms in May. Its white star-like blossoms make beautiful crowns for Beltane revelers. If you weave hawthorn branches into a laurel and leave them out under a full moon, it is said that the fairies will come and dance around it. Such a crown that the fairies have danced around will bring luck to anyone who wears it. Hawthorns are a traditional kludi tree. A kludi is a piece of colored cloth or ribbon that is used in ritual blessing. The cloth or ribbon is dipped into a sacred spring, well, or stream, and hung on the branches of the hawthorn as a blessing or a prayer. Hawthorns have been used to bless weddings, and traditionally maypoles are made of the hawthorn. Gods and goddesses associated with this tree are Belenus and the Modron. You've been listening to the Way of the Taibhsear podcast on International Pagan Radio, where it's all pagan all the time. This has been Episode 9, Global Warming. Music on this episode featured Mama Gaia's Going Through Menopause by Mama Gina and Yellow Branch by Sencha Skene. The Way of the Taibhsear is the official podcast of the Order of the Taibhsear. You can learn more about us at taibhsear.com. That's TAIBHSEAR.com. You can get in touch with the Way of the Taibhsear podcast at podcast@taibhsear.com. Again, that's TAIBHSEAR.com. The Way of the Taibhsear is a podcast about Druidry and paganism as practiced by the Order of the Taibhsear. Paganism is a wide and diverse community, and we don't claim to speak for all pagans. The Way of the Taibhsear is sponsored by Pagan Promotions. Learn more about Pagan Promotions at paganpromotions.com. Until next time, blessings of the ancestors.